Hello, climate champions. Welcome to another episode of the Climate Network with me, Deepsha Dhal. Our guest today, Mr. Aditya Panda, is a distinguished naturalist, a committed wildlife conservationist, and an accomplished photographer. Through his lens and conservation activities, he actively contributes to the ongoing dialogue and action on wildlife preservation, underscoring the critical importance of harmony between humans and nature. Welcome, Aditya Bhai.
Thank you, Dipcha.
Let me begin by asking you how you stumbled upon wildlife. Can you share some of your experiences and influences from your early life that led you to become so passionate about wildlife conservation?
Well, I didn't stumble upon it. I think all human beings are born with a natural curiosity for the outdoors and the natural world. All of us as children are intrigued by bugs, by animals, by birds. But what really helped me channel that interest, or what really, nurtured that interest, uh, was, I think, my grandfather. My grandfather used to be an outdoors person himself. And back in the day when it was legal, hunting was one of his big sort of passions. And he used to be a PWD engineer in the Odisha of the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. And especially in his early years, he had the opportunity to travel extensively across the state, which was then far more remote than it is today, and had far more natural spaces and wildlife. And he did a lot of hunting, of course. And almost all my bedtime stories growing up were his jungle stories and his shikar stories. Of course, he gave
Nice.
up hunting like many people in that era did. He gave up hunting well before it was even outlawed in the country. But he used to regale me with these stories of jungles and tigers and duck hunting in Chodwar and things like that. And I always grew up with this extreme fascination, bordering on obsession. I wouldn't say bordering; it was actually obsession of jungles and wildlife. So, despite having primarily had an urban upbringing, I was always craving for the outdoors and wilderness.
How old were you then?
Well, as far back as I can remember, I mean, I'm told that even before I could learn to speak, when I was a kid, I was a very fussy eater. Still am. But so if I wouldn't eat my food, and if I created a scene about eating, my grandfather would bring out one of his National Geographic magazines and show me animal pictures in it. And while I'd be distracted by that, my mother would feed me. So right from the beginning of my conscious memory, I've always been incredibly in love with wildlife and wild spaces.
How did you pick up photography as your tool? Or what gave you the lenses to get
So,
into?
as I was growing um, in my teens, of course, growing up, I was reading a lot of wildlife books. And you look at the pictures in these books and you get fascinated about them. Um, Back in those days, even today, a lot of the first wildlife books that a kid would read would probably be, especially in India, would probably be the books by Jim Corbett and Kenneth Anderson, the classics of Indian wildlife. And of course, most of these were shikar stories, but um, these were not books that advocated shikar. These were never books that encouraged shikar. And both these authors were people who had eventually given up hunting. And Corbett, in particular, had given up hunting in favor of photography and filmmaking. So, when you go out as a naturalist, out into the field to watch and observe wildlife and wild animals. It's a very it's a very human sort of need to come back with something. We want to preserve memories. A lot of naturalists come back with notes. Some people like to make sketches and paintings of whatever they observe to keep a record, and others take pictures, and there are some, of course, who do all of that together. So there was that very natural need to uh, document wildlife around you, to in some way capture, because you see, I strongly believe that uh, human beings have always been hunters, and all of us have a sort of
Natural instinct.
a natural instinct, a deep genetic drive to pursue other creatures. And earlier, hunters used to hunt animals and get back trophies, the heads, pelts, whatever. And today, that drive has been channelized in a more conscious, in a more civilized society, in a much nicer way, where you still pursue animals, but the welfare of the animal remains your primary
Priority.
goal. And you still come back with a trophy, except that that trophy could be an observation, it could be a diary entry, it could be a painting, it could be a photograph, or it could be footage. So, as I started going out more and more and watching more and more wildlife, I needed to uh, do that myself. And my uncle gifted me a film camera when I think I was 14 or so. Um, and, I started out with that, and then gradually over time became a uh, full blown wildlife photographer.
Amazing photographer. So, you also use your photographs as a means to communicate what is going on in the natural habitats. You recently posted a video of a tiger picking up the plastic bottle and taking it away from the place where it was drinking
Mhm.
water. For
You
that.
see, photography, or for that matter, any art form, is crucial uh, to communicate things to people. The very cliched phrase, a picture speaks 1,000 words, is very true. Um, Recently, I was speaking at a discussion about converging art and conservation, and I cited uh, you know uh, an example, an analogy that I had read somewhere. That you see, uh, the bedrock of conservation is science. It's social science, politics, administration, all of that. That's the bedrock of it. That is what keeps conservation implemented and uh, ongoing. Just like the roots of a tree, you know, the roots of a tree keep the tree alive and standing and supported. But that's all they do. For the tree to actually complete its life cycle, for it to propagate, it has to make itself attractive. It has to make itself attractive to birds, to bees, to butterflies, to fruit bats. And that is why it has to produce, beautiful, nice smelling, enticing looking flowers and pulpy fruit, so that all these animals and birds are attracted to the tree. They help it pollinate. They help disperse the seeds of the tree by eating its fruit and dropping the seeds or pooping the seeds out elsewhere, so that then a new tree can grow. So just like that, while science and social science might be the roots of conservation, art in any form, popular writing, paintings, photography, cinematography, is what really brings conservation to the masses, makes it acceptable by people, and makes it a public movement. If you ask anybody, um, especially urban people, how they got interested in wildlife, people who are interested in wildlife, most of them will tell you that Well, they saw National Geographic documentaries or wildlife documentaries on TV, or they read some picture book or magazine or coffee table book that triggered their interest. So, pictures make the science and the complications, or the social complications of conservation, much easier to communicate to the common public. And pictures help people, nothing awes people more about wildlife than pictures, good pictures or good videos. People look at the picture of a tigress carrying her cubs, and immediately, deep rooted stereotypes that the tiger is a dangerous animal that kills people uh, gets changed to, oh, look what a beautiful animal that cares about its young, like all of us do. So, yes, pictures do help make people fall in love with wildlife. Pictures also help tremendously in educating people about wildlife. A good picture with a good caption uh, does a lot more education and awareness than a 50-page journal which nobody will read because it's
Yeah.
mostly in Latin. And similarly, complex conservation issues can also be fairly simply explained to people and to administrations, to governments, through photo stories. I think they're really very powerful.
Thank you. That is such an amazing way of bringing art together in conservation. The last time we spoke, we had a conversation about your work in Satkosia and in Simlipal. Now that the government is actively working towards preservation and conservation, it just looks like your lobbying and all your hard work has come true. You once mentioned that apart from the giant refugee campaign, where conservationists address human elephant conflict, due to habitat loss, elephants just wander from place to place like refugees.
Mm.
Can you please elaborate on that analogy? And since we are talking about migration, can you tell us a little about the invisible boundaries and borders that exist? You mentioned an entire belt: Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, Madhya Pradesh, Odisha. How does it work with invisible boundaries?
You see, all these creatures that we've been talking about, tigers, elephants, leopards, um, these are what we call large ranging species. These are species of animals that cannot be confined to, one national park or one area. These are species that are naturally that have naturally evolved to exist across massive landscapes. They need to move just like we are. We cannot spend our entire lives in Bhubaneswar. We need to be able to visit other places. We need to be able to travel. We need to be able to meet our needs in so many different ways. Just like that, elephants and tigers, they need to be able to move. Elephants, even more so, because tigers only disperse large distances at certain stages of their lives. Elephants must disperse over large distances throughout their lives. Um, these creatures require large, contiguous, high quality areas of habitat that span across multiple districts and even multiple states. Um, our way of life, our way of development is entirely at odds with that natural necessity. We build infrastructure that fragments natural habitats. We build highways, railway tracks, power lines, canals. The popular term for it in conservation biology is linear infrastructure, straight lines. They literally cut through habitats, preventing animals from one side from being able to cross over to the other side, isolating population from population. Um, that is causing a lot of damage. That is just also one of the causes of habitat fragmentation. There's not only fragmentation, there is also quality depletion. Um,
Is climate a reason as well?
Climate change is a consequence of that. Climate change might also increasingly in today's day and age, when we are having irregular rainfall patterns, we are having um, uh, a very clearly increasing number of very hot days, um, summers that are becoming very, very dry. Um, you know, I'm not a climate scientist, so I don't think even a climate scientist will be able to very accurately tell exactly if climate change is causing this, but a lot of it is very clearly human action, almost all of it. Habitat depletion happens because in areas that are less protected, areas that are not wildlife sanctuaries or national parks, there is very little control over. Legally, there is control, but in effect, there is very little control on how people exploit those habitats. There is a lot of illegal felling that happens. There is tremendous amounts of cattle grazing that happens, which, livestock grazing. There are almost as many cows in India as there are people, if not more, uh, billion and a half or so. Livestock grazing is one of the worst things for wildlife habitats. Uncontrolled livestock grazing, that is. When cattle start grazing in a forest, they end up driving away wild ungulates. Ungulates are hoofed animals. So, wild ungulates like deer, like gore, which is the largest wild bovine. And not only do they drive them away, they spread diseases which these animals are not immune to and die out from. And they overgraze, so they completely end up destroying the forage available to wild animals in these habitats. So you have habitat fragmentation, habitat destruction, both happening at the same time due to various reasons. It's a very long list of reasons, and all of it human caused, that are responsible for these two things happening. And um, what that is doing is that it is leaving elephants with very little quality habitat to live in. Elephants are long lived animals. So, say if you destroy a forest, very soon deer, wild pigs, the common animals, they can vanish easily without notice. Elephants are long lived animals, they don't vanish without notice. Uh, on the outskirts of Bhubaneswar, you have areas which are what we call human dominated, but still have elephants in them. You can also call them, human dominated is one word. You can also call them elephant hostile or whatever landscapes. These are landscapes which had elephants or around which there used to be elephants. Today, those elephants have nowhere to go. They are forced to exist in these landscapes. They take cover by whatever cover is available in these landscapes. It could be the remaining patches of natural forest. It could be a fruit grove. It could be, a lot of commercial and completely ecologically unfit trees like eucalyptus are being planted in great numbers. So it could be a eucalyptus plantation. It could be any kind of cover. They are just taking cover by day. And as soon as the sun sets, as soon as human activity begins to slow down, they're raiding crops. And that's becoming a big problem. They are even earlier it might have started out as forced behavior out of desperation. Now it has become learnt behavior where they're realizing that rather than having to forage all day in the forest, eating branches and leaves and trying to get nutrition out of it, you can raid crops for 2 hours and get really high sugar, high quality nutrition in a very short time. So it's becoming like fast food. There is a lot of addiction to it, and it's been going on long enough that there are now the younger generations of elephants. only know that. So I'll take the example of Satkosia, for example, which is a reserve I have been associated with for the whole of my adult life. Um, Earlier, when we used to go to Satkosia in the summers, 2007, 8, that period, even after that, in the summer, if you drove around Satkosia, you would be coming across multiple herds of elephants inside the park. It used to be, almost scary to walk or drive inside Satkosia in the summer because of the number of elephants that would be inside. There would always be between 150 to 200 elephants within the Satkosia Gorge Wildlife Sanctuary. Today, if you go into Satkosia at any time of the year, there are never more than 20, 30 elephants inside. Never. Despite the fact that the habitat inside Satkosia has improved from what it had in 2007-8. So, a lot of things are going on. Elephants are very intelligent creatures. Um, they do their own thinking. And perhaps as a result of this sort of learnt behavior among the younger generations of elephants, and the uh, sort of acceptance by elephants that crop breeding is much more rewarding, high risk, high reward, than
Foraging.
foraging in the forest. They're now increasingly beginning to stay on the fringes of the reserve. And that entire belt is also a very high crop yielding area, Mahanadi floodplains. So it's 365 days a year of conflict. Coming back to the topic of invisible boundaries, of course, human drawn boundaries are not recognized by elephants. You can demarcate on a revenue map, you know, various kinds of land use practices. You can say that this is a road and this is a wildlife sanctuary, and that is supposed to be according to the map an elephant corridor. You see, you're driving across Odisha, you'll see every here and there, um, you'll see signs saying elephant corridor, slow down. The thing is, elephants don't read. And, uh, what might have been mapped as elephant corridors 20 years ago might not actually be a corridor anymore. We demarcate, the earlier idea of corridor was that it's a fixed migration path of sorts that elephants used. But over the years, all of that has changed so drastically. We have elephants in districts where elephants were never known. We have districts like Dhenkanal, which have seen what I call refugee elephants from the highly industrialized districts of Angul and Keonjhar, industrialized and mining affected districts. Elephants from those districts just fleeing into Dhenkanal. And in the past 10, 15 years, we have seen the number of elephants in Dhenkanal just grow exponentially. And today it is one of the most highly human elephant conflict affected districts of the country. We have basically started seeing a lot of random migration, a lot of elephants desperately trying to seek out safe spaces to be in, and making exploratory forays into areas they were never known in, into areas where people do not know how to live with them. People have never lived with them in those areas. So when the until 2003 4, that period, our very own Chandka Wildlife Sanctuary had about 65 elephants. When and these elephants were always under stress. If you look at English newspaper or Odia newspaper reports from the period between 2000 to 2004, you will see the number of reports of human-elephant conflict on the outskirts of Bhubaneswar was tremendous. Every single day there would be reports about that. You don't see that so much today. You read about human-elephant conflict, but not from Bhubaneswar outskirts. So Chandaka's elephants began abandoning Chandaka around that period, and then you had elephants going down to places like Barbara and into Ganjam and eventually into northern Andhra Pradesh. Andhra Pradesh was a state that did not have any memory of being of having elephants, wild elephants. So basically, elephants were desperately trying to seek out new habitats, and that has been the case continuously over the past 20-25 years now. Um, in central India, Kanha, Bandhavgarh, that landscape, there haven't been wild elephants in over 100 years. Um, Chhattisgarh also did not really have resident elephants until about 20 years ago. You had occasional elephants coming in from Jharkhand, and there were a few elephants in Sarguja. But other parts of Chhattisgarh did not have elephants. Elephants gradually started pouring in from Odisha and colonizing Chhattisgarh, becoming occasional visitors first and then permanent residents. And then now you have in the past just 7 years now, we have seen this amazing repopulation of elephants at Bandhavgarh, where in 2017 a small number of elephants visited Bandhavgarh. Then they became resident. Now you have over 70 elephants that have occupied Bandhavgarh. These elephants are again from this Odisha population, originally Odisha population, that have spread across central India. So, living with elephants, especially under such circumstances where, there are no hard boundaries, there are no fixed boundaries, migration patterns have completely, they've become chaotic. There are no set patterns anymore, uh, except in some areas, like some areas that have not seen so much disturbance, like Simlipal. Um, it's a big challenge. We are seeing the consequences every day. We are facing the consequences every day. It's I think one of our single biggest human wildlife conflict challenges.
I could go on and on with my questions. So we have habitat conservation, we have ecotourism, we have establishment of resorts there, which are known as eco resorts. There's also gaining of land use for permission for commercial use. So let's talk about sustainable tourism. Uh, we see a lot of crowding also at these new locations that have come up that promises an experience, right? So, do you think it's the right way to bring in more development? Can you tell us more about the impacted natural habitats, the communities, and the economy in general?
Sure. It's a very vast topic, but I'll try and be as concise and as precise as I can. You see, the tourism, in theory, um, is an industry that does not take away anything. You have tourism. There are many ways of land use to generate revenues and livelihoods, and starting from agriculture to mining and industry, all of them take away from the land. All of them harm the land, destroy the land, physically take away from the land to generate revenue or livelihoods. Tourism is probably the only industry that benefits or generates by keeping the land as it is, more or less. Used in the right way, used carefully, used with forethought and planning and good management, wildlife tourism is the single most effective conservation tool. And of course, misused or not used properly, it can destroy everything. It's like the
Double
simple
sword.
double-edged sword, or the difference between a knife and a surgeon's scalpel, whatever you want to explain it as. Um, we have examples of both in India. There are states like Madhya Pradesh, which have absolutely created the gold standard of wildlife tourism, where not only is wildlife tourism enabling the common Indian citizen to come and see their own the finest of our own natural habitats and wildlife, but at the same time it is creating um, employment at scale. There are many ecotourism or conservation tourism models that claim to create community employment. Very few create employment at scale, like the national parks of Madhya Pradesh do. Um, Creating employment and generating revenues at scale is very, very important when you talk about real community involvement. You see, ecotourism, the word ecotourism is a highly misused and very abused term. Um, One of the definitions of ecotourism is that it should, the local community, wherever ecotourism is being conducted, the local community should be the first and the highest recipient of the revenues generated. In the national parks of Madhya Pradesh, of course, there is a lot of outside investment. A lot of the high-end resorts and lodges that are owned by people who do not belong there. I agree. But if you look at it realistically also, there isn't really the capacity, or until now, there hasn't been the capacity among the local population to, make that sort of investment to come up with properties like that. But if you look at the general model of wildlife tourism in Madhya Pradesh, and I love taking the example of Kanha National Park, especially in an Odisha context, because I find many similarities between Eastern MP and Odisha when it comes to wildlife and conservation. Habitats are similar. Odisha is a little more moist. Um, Communities are similar, primarily indigenous tribes. Um, Community practices had also traditionally been similar, with Eastern Madhya Pradesh in the past having seen a lot of forest dependence by the communities, a lot of bushmeat hunting by communities. But something happened that completely changed things there and here. The trajectory completely changed, say, over the past 30, 40 years. Um, and today we have places like Kanha, where the a place which faced very similar challenges to what we face here today, and it has been addressed to a very great extent. And one of the reasons, I think the key reason behind that, has been the establishment of a really good wildlife tourism model. In Kanha, the park management or the government, the administration, does not um, involve itself uh, much beyond the setting up of rules and regulations and implementation of rules and regulations in the whole ecotourism business. In many states of the country, we see the states are actually running the ecotourism business. If you look at Karnataka, they have a famous wildlife resort chain called Jungle Lodges and Resorts, which is owned by the government of Karnataka, and they have total sort of monopoly over a tourist's wildlife experience in their national parks. Madhya Pradesh did not do anything like that. They set the rules and regulations and the policy framework for wildlife tourism, and they left the business to businessmen.
Privatization.
not privatization. They did not do anything to privatize. The national park remains under government control as it has always been.
Okay.
But private properties have come up outside it. There are rules that prioritize the employment of local people in the whole spectrum of ecotourism business there. Um, the primary experience that people go to places like that are game drives, uh, wrongly referred to as safaris by Indians. A safari is an experience. It's an at the moment you leave home and go out wherever you are going till you come back is a safari. A game drive is just one of the many things you can do on a safari. So we have game drives in many national parks across India, and of course, in Kanha, that is the primary activity for which people go. They want to go on a game drive in the national park. They want to see the wildlife. They want to see the tiger. That is the main activity there. And um, every time you enter the national park on a game drive, you have to take a guide with you. The guide has to be a local person who has been trained and certified by the MP Forest Department. The vast majority of drivers are also local. Um, and of course, the lodges, especially the good lodges, which, um, you know, most safari lodges, especially the ones that want to be popular, that want to be seen, as a good brand and want to attract the right kind of clientele, they want to be seen as not only adding to the acreage of the national park, but also as providing local employment and as being sustainable businesses, because the wildlife tourist of 2024 is highly aware, highly interested in conservation. By and large, I'm not saying that as a general term, but by and large, your high end wildlife tourist is somebody who, especially inbound tourists, people who come in from abroad, they are very, very conscious of their impact on conservation. They do not want their own visit to have in any way a negative impact on the landscape. And therefore, they want to use properties and service providers who are doing it with conservation as their first priority. So, all these lodges will prioritize local employment. So, the vast majority of their staff will be from the local communities, very frequently trained by because you might not, if you're setting up a lodge in a place like that, you might not find trained manpower, or you might not find trained human resources. So, you will pick up people who have potential, put in the effort to train them and employ them at their lodges rather than get some hotel management trained people from outside. A good lodge wouldn't do that. They would focus on local staff. So if you see the number of people employed directly by wildlife tourism in a place like Kanha, it is very high. And what we have seen over the years is that the skill set of the local community has grown by leaps and bounds over the years, thanks to their exposure to the outside world, to tourists from everywhere. And the community as a whole has evolved and grown to an extent where now you have many locals having their own homestays, having their own lodges. Um, and you see, automatically that means that your local population is not seeing forests and wildlife as things to exploit, but as something to preserve and um, get a livelihood out of preserving it rather than exploiting it. If you go to Kanha again, um, just see where it is on the map. Okay, it's on it's on the far eastern corner of Madhya Pradesh, bordering Chhattisgarh. That part of India is seen as the back of beyond. That part of India, if you superimpose a Naxalite map of India or a left-wing extremism map of India, it is right in the center of it. Um, Kanha National Park is spread over two districts called Balaghat and Mandla, which are the only two Naxalite affected districts of Madhya Pradesh. If you go 30 kilometers away from Kanha um, and look at villages and people around there, it is just like anywhere else in Chhattisgarh or Western Odisha. Very poor people, very little with them, very low, uh, you know, human development index. As soon as you get to the vicinity of Kanha National Park, especially the clusters of villages that are part of the tourism industry, you will see high levels of education, high, pretty good income, very significant amount of empowered women. Almost half the guides in Kanha, especially the Mukhi side of the park, the eastern side of the southern side of the park, almost half the guides are women. You have local women who speak flawless English, who can tell you everything about wildlife and plants and the forest, who own and drive their own jeeps. Can you imagine that sort of human development anywhere in that belt, that Odisha, Chhattisgarh, MP, Jharkhand belt? Western Odisha, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, and Eastern MP. You'll not find that away from the national parks. This is, a fantastic example of how wildlife tourism not only um, directly helps in conserving wildlife by taking people's dependence away from forest and wildlife and from making it a resource for exploitation, makes it, turns it into something to preserve and showcase and gain a livelihood out of. But it is also an example of how wildlife conservation directly causes the empowerment and the uplifting and the development of a community. And I don't know if you don't call that sustainable, I don't know what is. Yeah.
The government of Odisha has appointed you as an honorary wildlife warden. This seems like a replicable model.
Yes, it is.
Have you worked with the government regarding the same? What kind of perspective have you brought to the table? Are they accepting of these ideas?
Yes, I have been pushing for this with our state wildlife wing for a very long time now. And I'm extremely happy to say that they've been very receptive. And we are currently figuring out the modalities, the ways to start, the first steps in recreating that model in Odisha. And uh, in fact, I don't know if you've been following the news because there's been very little about it in the papers. Um, we are actually beginning to take first steps in Simlipal very soon. Um, uh, I'm the honorary wildlife warden of Ongole district, which includes the Satkosya Tiger Reserve and Mahanadi Elephant Reserve. And, there are some uh, policy rules that are preventing us from starting in Satkosya this year, but hopefully that will change by next year. There is a policy document that governs how tourism can be conducted in a tiger reserve, and that document is renewed every 10 years. So the next time it is renewed, we will try and make those changes in that so that we can replicate the same model in Satkosya as well. And I think it is high time we did this in Odisha. We really lost many opportunities in the past, and had we managed to do this earlier, we would have prevented a lot of
Damage.
wildlife, a lot of damage that has been done. But it's better late than never, and we are going to start at Simlipal very soon, and Satkosya will be a sort of natural continuation of that maybe in a year or two.
That is such great news. What do you think about overcrowding at tiger reserves these days?
Well, the number of vehicles that can enter a tiger reserve, the number of lodges that can come up around a tiger reserve, the distance at which they can come up around a tiger reserve are all regulated. But having said that, you see, there are videos that come on social media. Anybody who's been on safari in India will have experienced this also several times, where you see 10, 15, 20 jeeps crowding around one tiger. There are two things about this. The first thing is, the first question would be, does it bother the tiger? For those people who experience a sight like that, people who might be part of the crowd, or people who watch these videos, but people who might not necessarily understand tiger behavior enough, it is a very distressing sight. It appears as if the animal is highly distressed. You see, the thing about tigers is they, if it's a distressing situation and they don't want to go through it, they'll never be there. They'll never go through it. You see jeeps crowding around as a tiger is crossing the road, or you see a tiger walking down the road, followed by, literally a barat of jeeps, and led by another barat of jeeps, and the tiger walking in between. No tiger who wants to stay away from a crowd like that will ever walk on a road in a situation like that. Usually, the tigers that walk like that are tigers who are very bold, who are very used to the presence of vehicles, and who don't care really. The only situation in such circumstances where I do have strong reservations, and I'm known to scream at people when they do this while I'm present, is when a jeep is blocking a tiger's path and preventing it from going where it wants to go. But the park guides and drivers in our national parks are, they care about the welfare of the animal. At the same time, they also care about having their guest get a good view of the animal, because the pressure is tremendous. People come for 1 or 2 or 3 nights, and they spend a lot of money to do that, and the pressure on the guide and driver is tremendous to deliver a quality sighting. So I feel sorry for those guys there, both for the guides and drivers, and also for the tourists who spend so much money wanting a quality wildlife experience, but letting it get hijacked entirely by this drive only to see a tiger, and they become so tiger fixated that they forget to enjoy everything else that the experience offers. Um, so, guides and drivers in most national parks in India, uh, in different degrees, where tiger tourism is practiced, guides and drivers have figured out a way to balance this. When a tiger, the best tiger sightings, or the closest tiger sightings usually happen when the tiger is walking on a road, either crossing it or walking down it. When a tiger is about to cross a road, jeeps will usually line up on either end. Guides and drivers know regularly used trails very well, the habits of the local tigers very well, and they know where to preposition their vehicles in order to, in anticipation of the tiger crossing or walking down the road. So that again appears crowded in pictures and videos. And of course, people are people. They're noisy. They talk. They shout. They scream. There are excited tourists. There are children screaming. Uh, all of that. Camera shutters going off. And the tiger does what the tiger does. I personally feel that unless a tiger's path is being blocked, um, the tigers that are used to walking around vehicles or being around vehicles are less distressed than the people who watch these sites or who happen to be part of these sites. Um, Remember, these are tigers that have grown up seeing vehicles. Tigers don't know that there are people in the vehicles. Tigers see a vehicle as a separate entity, as a large animal that never leaves the road, that never chases anybody, that doesn't do any harm. But like every other animal in the forest, these things tend to herd up and make a lot of noise whenever a tiger is out and about. You see, when a tiger is walking in the jungle, every living creature that sees it catcalls, makes some sort of alarm call or the other, uh, crowds around it, keeps an eye on it. The tiger is used to being mobbed. That's a fact of his existence. Because if he's not mobbed, other animals are at danger. That is why when a tiger is on the hunt, it makes every effort to not be seen. But when a tiger is just going about his business, he doesn't care about being seen, and he's used to his very presence causing a racket in the jungle. So the noise from jeeps does not bother tigers at all. Those tigers that are bothered by jeeps or the noise from them, those tigers that are not used to them, will rarely, if ever, even appear in front of jeeps. And when they do appear, it's usually a quick, very quick sighting. They're very they'll not walk down roads being followed and led by jeeps. Um, these animals also have learned behavior. If a tigress is comfortable with jeeps, her cubs will grow up being comfortable with jeeps. Often we find that tigers that come in from outside the tourism zones, no more than 20% of the core area of any tiger reserve can be opened up for tourism. Um, we've often seen that tigers that come from outside tourism zones are usually shy and will not come in front of vehicles. At the same time, we have seen tigers that have grown up around vehicles, and you can be parked 20 feet from them. They'll be absolutely at ease and not care. And it's not just the tigers, a lot of other animals, even deer, peafowl, um, they become very comfortable with vehicles because vehicles are not seen as human. Humans are seen as the biped form, walking. I can cite numerous examples to you where we've been sitting on game drive, watching, observing, photographing an animal. It could be a deer, in many cases also a tiger, where you have had 10, 15 vehicles just parked and there's a tiger sitting there 20 or 30 feet from these vehicles. People talking, screaming, shouting, cameras going off, all of that. Tiger doesn't give a damn. But half a kilometer down the road, one lone forest guard is walking down with his stick or bicycling down, and the animal sees that and just gets up and bolts. Our perception is that uh, vehicles moving around in a forest cause a lot of disturbance. That is why, in fact, this flawed perception has even led to policies in some of our national parks and wildlife sanctuaries, particularly in the south, where walking safaris or treks are encouraged instead of
Vehicles.
vehicles. They say that vehicles cause problems and disturb the wildlife and forest. Walk, and that is a less intrusive way of experiencing wildlife. Walking actually causes far more disturbance than a vehicle. A person on foot in a forest causes far more fear and disturbance than a vehicle, uh, because animals get used to vehicles, they never get used to people on foot. And when you have a group of people walking on foot, it could be, you know, people from a village going somewhere, or it could be a bunch of conscious ecotourists trekking together. That causes far more fear and disturbance than the presence of a vehicle, in my opinion.
My last question to you is, what is your vision for the future of wildlife conservation in India and globally? What are your hopes and what are your fears?
Well, vision should always be to have as much land as possible restored to its natural um, wilderness, to its natural state. When I say natural state, I mean entire functioning ecosystems. And no ecosystem is functioning or complete without its top carnivore, which is usually the umbrella species in any ecosystem, doing well. So, across India, I would like to see not only our existing wildlife havens protected and doing well, but also a lot of the degraded habitats that we have, a lot of the converted habitats that we have restored to significantly high quality. Now, I can't tell exactly what proportion of our land should be uh, left wild and nurtured back to wilderness, because that is really for that's the subject of a lot of science. Because you have there are these schools of thoughts that say, oh, half earth there's a half earth policy thing which says 50% of the world should be wild and 50% should be occupied by humans. There is, our in India, our policy for the longest time has been that one third of our, for some reason in India, when it comes to any sort of reservation, any sort of um, anything to do with reservation, we like to have this one third policy, 33%. um, but speaking purely from a climate science point of view, or from a sustainability point of view, it's very difficult to put a finger on what the minimum amount of um, land that should be preserved as natural has to be. I don't have any answer to that, but what I would like to see is as much land as possible restored to wilderness. I would like to see a lot more natural spaces available to the average Indian, um, so that our children can have the freedom to explore and wander in the wilderness and learn firsthand, and not necessarily always have to visit a national park, as if visiting a zoo or a closed place where only privileged entry is permitted, where you either have to have the means or the permits to, for the simple act of enjoying your own motherland's natural areas. You should not be having to only visit a national park or protected area. Every kid should be able to walk or bicycle from his or her neighborhood and access an area that is wilderness, that is true wilderness. So, utopian vision, yes, that is what it would be. Um, and
What are your hopes and fears?
um, I would say my hopes are far more than my fears. If you asked me this question 15 years ago, when I was much younger and angrier, uh, I would have listed down a long list of fears. But, um, you know, uh, having watched things firsthand so closely for such a long time now, I um, have a much more mature reply to that. Um, See, Deepsha, when we started this conversation, I said that India might be a large country, but it's a highly overpopulated and an extremely land-starved country. Um, what I will add to that now is that despite this, uh, you know, fact of life, we are the last bastion of almost all of Asia's megafauna species, be it tigers, of which we are, home to 75% of the world's wild tigers, be it tigers, be it Asian elephants, be it Asiatic lion, of which we have all, be it the leopard, be it snow leopards, be it sloth bear, be it Himalayan brown bear, gore, Asiatic wild buffalo. You mention any large fauna of Asia, they have vanished from across most of their range across the continent, except for India. In India, not only are their populations stable and breeding, but also growing. In India, um, despite this reality that we are a very, very land starved country, somehow we have, over the past few decades, managed to not only slow down the loss of habitat for these species, but also gradually we have begun increasing it. You see, we are a country that has the world's finest wildlife conservation legislation and policies. Our policy framework is very, very strong. There have periodically been attacks on it by various governments. But strong policy can usually withstand all of that. So that is one thing. And the other thing is that in India, in the 1970s, again, I was mentioning when conservation was brought in and hunting was outlawed and Project Tiger was started, conservation was seen to be imposed upon people as a rich person's indulgence being imposed on a starving poor nation. Um, that has dramatically changed. Today, there is tremendous amounts of middle class involvement in conservation. Um, Anything to do with wildlife, any major news immediately hits the headlines. I lead wildlife expeditions professionally across India, and most of my clientele come from the West, uh, Europe, and America. They tell me every time I take them on safari anywhere in India, there's always this one observation that they make. They say that, we've been to Africa so many times. And when we are on safari in Africa, we see that the tourists there, the people visiting their national parks and game reserves and private reserves, they're all from abroad. They're either whites or Chinese or Indian. They say that we don't see very many Africans on safari. And that is true not only for, ethnically African origin people, but also for white South Africans or white Kenyans. They say that we do not see a lot of Africans on safari. But when we are on safari in India, we see more Indians than foreigners on safari. So I think the growth of wildlife tourism in this country over the past 20 years has played a tremendous role in making wildlife accessible to common people and in making wildlife the subject of drawing room conversation in the average Indian household. Um, so conservation here truly sees public participation. You have the government doing what it needs to do, the forest department primarily, um, but you also have active participation of not only NGOs and institutions, but also private individuals. actively taking part in the conservation process, or you could say the conservation conversation. um, uh, Levels of awareness are better than ever before. Levels of participation are also better than ever before, and that's increasing. That gives me a lot of hope. There is nothing dramatic that I can see happening which will change the tide of this. Last year we celebrated 50 years of Project Tiger. Yes, there have been ups and downs, but it has primarily been ups. If you look at our 52-year history now in wildlife conservation from 1972 until 2024, it has mostly been gains. And also, earlier we used to worry a lot about the population bomb, but I think our population growth now is um, 2.3% or something. I don't know the exact two. It's either 2.3 or 2.6, one of those figures, which happens to be that sort of borderline figure at and below which a population begins to stop growing and plateau and then gradually go down. So, as far as the population damage is concerned, I think whatever uh, it could have done has been done. And from here on, it's not going to be that big a challenge. Earlier in the 80s and 90s and even early 2000s, conservationists used to be terrified at the scale at which the population was growing and the scale at which land was being converted and the scale at which forest land was being converted into other landforms. So, as the nation grows economically, of course, these things change in any nation that advances economically, and that is beginning to happen in India too. So, I mostly have hopes. I have very few fears. My uh, fears, if any, would be situations where um, governments become controlled by oligarchs, where that very policy foundation that we should rightly be so proud of in this country begins to get broken and changed. That will be a tremendous loss if that happens. And we have seen really bad attempts at, like really scary attempts at trying to change that beginning to take place already.
On that note, thank you so much for coming today and talking with us. This has been a great experience. Where can we learn more about your work?
Well, I used to be very active on social media earlier. Then I decided to take a break, and now I find it very hard to try and get back. But I'll still try and keep people updated about my work. So you can find me on Twitter at Aditya Panda, capital A and capital P, one word. On Instagram at aditya.panda. And there's also my website, adityapanda.in.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming.
You're welcome.